You're invited to imagine what's next. What the next view you wake up to will be. Where your next adventures will start from. Your perfect space to entertain. And your sanctuary to unwind in. As you begin to imagine your new place, we'll be here to help you find it. Because nothing compares to what's next. Sotheby'sRealty.com.
From floods and garbage crisis to power cuts, road congestion and pollution, many of the issues that our cities face repeat every year like a broken record. One could say that our cities are not faced with 100 different problems, but the same problems repeated 100 times. I borrow this quote from the very comprehensive annual survey of India's city systems, or the ACI-CS 2023 report put together by Janaagraha, a Bengaluru-based not-for-profit institution working to transform the quality of life in India's cities and towns. On the urban agenda, we look at the solutions the report highlights which can fix root causes of India's urban challenges. What is surprising is that these challenges and problems persist despite the significant increase in the spends for urban development through centrally sponsored schemes and missions sanctioned by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, or MoHUA. Listen into what Minister Hardeep Puri had to say at the launch of this report.
The fact that this report includes the study of 82 municipal legislations, 44 town and country planning acts, 176 allied acts, rules and notifications, 32 other policy scheme documents and 27 additional data sets pertaining to urban development in India. It's truly a meticulous and praiseworthy effort, and I want to compliment you for that. I glanced through the 10 key recommendations that this report has made. I endorse these propositions and believe that these 10 instruments of change can deepen the principle of decentralization and devolution in urban governance and revitalize the spirit of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. I also note that the report has acknowledged that the Modi government has taken some unprecedented actions in working towards this agenda, including, and those are the points I think we make with confidence and in the full knowledge that that is the right direction. A six-fold increase in the Finance Commission grants to urban local bodies from the 13th Finance Commission to the 15th Finance Commission. The High-Level Committee on Urban Planning, which was constituted in 2022, recommended in its first report to set up a National Urban Regional Planning Authority to be led by the Prime Minister. The 15th Finance Commission distinguished between million-plus urban agglomerations and other cities, providing for 100% outcome-based funding of approximately rupees 38,196 crores to 50 urban agglomerations with incentives for air quality, water supply and sanitation. The Amrut program instituted 11 mandatory reforms in ULBs, including improving creditworthiness of cities, operationalizing municipal bonds, and the professionalization of the municipal cadre. 12 cities have raised more than rupees 4,384 crores through municipal bonds.
The outlays by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs have increased approximately from 8,000 crore rupees in 2009-10 to 47,000 plus crore rupees in 2021-22, which is an increase of 488%. That's a whopping number. But these big spends alone are clearly not the answer. Let's welcome BVR Subrahmanyam, CEO Niti Aayog, and Srikanth Vishwanathan, CEO Janaagraha, to understand what can really fix the root causes of India's urban issues, which cut across all our cities and towns. Gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time. Srikanth, first up, what an outstanding survey of India's city systems, and juxtaposed with examples of what each state is doing. Some cities are doing well, diversity of views, etc. Now, the report also defines 10 big solutions. For me, what jumped out were two major points. The lack of robust spatial planning of our cities. 39% of capital cities in India do not have an active master plan. And the very urgent need to assess and reform the laws The 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was meant to devolve power from the state government to municipalities or cities, and of course further also look at municipality acts. Can we start with explaining to our viewers what is the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act and why are the reforms critical?
India first became an independent country, and then we formed our states for the first few years of independence, and thereafter in the early 90s, when public discourse and political discourse felt that we need local self-governance to further strengthen governance and service delivery in India's cities and lend voice and agency to our citizens, the Parliament of India enacted the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments. The 74th Constitutional Amendments is meant to bring in local self-governance in India's cities, to have elected mayors and councils, to give them reasonable autonomy over functions, funds, and functionaries, as they call them, the three Fs, as we call them. So that was the intent of the 74th Constitutional Amendment.
Mr. Subrahmanyam, would you agree that the start has to be made with actually looking at India's 74th Amendment, Constitutional Amendment, and working around with empowering local governance of cities?
First of all, let me compliment Janaagraha for their wonderful report, the annual survey of India's city systems. I think they brought out the issues very well. However, I mean, governance is just one aspect. The larger thing which I see as far as the way we approach urban areas is, we seem to be taking urban growth as something that happens autonomously and then try to plan on how do you address that autonomous growth. The fact is, you don't need to actually take urban growth as a given. You can actually direct urban growth. You can leverage urban growth because cities are the most productive economic systems in the world. Even today, 60-70% of India's GDP is coming from urban areas. It will probably go up to 80-90% in a couple of years' time. So given that, we have to recognize cities as economic entities. And when the entire discourse which is there about urban systems, spatial planning, governance reform, 74th Amendment, all that, we seem to forget the fact that municipalities have a role in economic processes. And tell me which city in India actually has an economic wing where you can actually go knocking and say, look, I want to set up this business. How do I go about doing it? States have it. Government of India has it. But I think it's time for cities to start looking at that aspect also. If I want to go and open a business in London, I actually have somebody there in the mayor's office or wherever whom I can knock the door. I can do it in New York. I can do it in Tokyo and Dubai. I can't do it in a single city in India. I don't think we have brought that perspective to cities yet. And I think that's one of the challenges. And only when you have that, and that integrated with governance, as well as the thing which you mentioned, which is spatial planning, we'll be able to do something actually remarkable on the ground.
Srikanth, so how do we make that happen? You know, how do we have a mayor who's responsible, who takes responsibility, whose door we can knock at, who can be empowered with finances, resources to actually plan a city as a robust economic entity?
First off, 2-3 things. One is, I think we need to have boundless optimism about the future of India's urban story. And that is reflected in the union government's massive investments in urban infrastructure and services. So directionally, I think we are doing something right. State governments too are taking leadership and supplementing the energy that the union government has brought in with their own state level urban agendas. So I think directionally we are right. Yes, it is true that the pace of urbanization has gone far ahead than the capacities of municipalities to address pressing quality of life challenges like urban flooding, waste management, and so on. So really, I think, in my view, the first step is really enhancing administrative capacities of municipalities. While we do see cities as complex systems, needing to have, as Mr. Subrahmanyam said, they need to work on their economic plans, their spatial development plans, and 3-4 other things, like giving them greater autonomy and so on. I do feel states need to take leadership on institutional reform. State needs to empower municipalities with greater degrees of financial resources and human resources. And also, as Mr. Subrahmanyam said, get them involved in accelerating job creation and economic investments in the city. The fact that today a lot of the municipal functioning is directed towards grievance redressal and reactive problem solving, and not to proactively create an environment where businesses feel that the city offers me great infrastructure and services for me to attract talent and for me to invest capital in that city and create jobs.
How do we make that happen? Mr. Subrahmanyam, if you're saying that, okay, we have to make them autonomous, we cannot do that without bringing the changes in the Municipal Act or making those changes that the report says in the 74th Constitutional, Act. So my question is, do we not start there? We can keep saying we need an empowered mayor. We can keep saying they need to be more autonomous. We can keep saying that they need more money, they need more resources. Where do we start?
So let me put it this way. We recognize, first of all, I completely empathize with what Srikanth said. I am an optimist. And the optimism comes from many sources. Number one, the general direction being given by Government of India, I think that's very important. The interest being shown in cities at the national level is very important. Two, more importantly, I think increasingly, compared to 20 years ago, states have actually woken up to the potential of cities. I think barring a few here and there, most state governments now see cities as engines of their own economic growth, so they're investing in cities. So I think that's a good starting point. We were a largely rural country at the time of independence. So therefore, probably cities were not given that kind of importance in the state level political setup. But increasingly now cities are major contributors politically as well as economically. So I think states are giving far more importance. And I think that's a good thing. You need to have empowered local bodies. We need to have them capable of raising resources in multiple ways, be it through taxes, be it through use of charges, or be it through monetizing. Biggest thing about cities is in terms of monetizable assets. Cities are far, far, far more wealthy compared to, say, rural areas. But how many of our cities are doing it? And I think the assets report actually brings out those issues. Things like municipal taxation, it need not be transfers. I'm quite confident. Look at what we are talking about in Bombay. Bombay is a $150 billion city. India is going to go 10 times in the next 30 years by 2047. So India is going to become a $30 trillion economy. Bombay is going to be $1.5 trillion. That's half the size of India today. But Bombay also has the financial capacity within the city to raise the resources. Very often taxation is such a poisonous thing for most governments. The lower it is delegated, probably the easier it is, because then there's a direct connect between the taxes and the benefits. You put a national level tax, you don't know where the money goes. It goes into something which I don't see a benefit. But I pay a municipal tax and I see that either in terms of the services I get or in terms of the value enhancement of my properties. People are probably more willing to pay that. And there are excellent examples. And Janaagraha itself can give the example of what their own tender for sure, etc., have led to increase in real estate values and supported local level for, giving in more money to municipal bodies. So I think there is a menu of work. It's a question of navigating the waters. A lot of these things won't happen by fiat. And a lot of these things won't happen uniformly across the country, But the beauty of our country is, because of so much of this has to be done at state level, you'll have some leaders. And then the laggards will start copying the leaders because they'll feel left behind.
All right. So what you're saying is start with an economic plan for the city, overlay it with spatial planning, find out what are the resources to make a city self-sufficient, and probably then look at devolution of power. Srikanth, would you agree with what Mr. Subrahmanyam is saying?
I agree, Manisha, because we need incentives to work for powers to be given away to another tier of government. And job creation and economic growth has become a salient public agenda, political agenda. We are seeing states compete with each other to attract investments and talent. We've seen that, for example, between Hyderabad and Bangalore. We are seeing that between Ahmedabad and Bombay, Gift City and Bombay, etc. So, and I think it's good for the country overall. It's good for our urban future. Therefore, I do agree that our economic plan and the ability of our cities to attract capital and talent will in turn act as a forcing function to get states to include the municipality in the larger urban agenda and result in mayors and councils having a greater role to play in India's urbanization.
Your report also talks about the role of the councillor, who's sometimes in many of or municipal commissioner as well. And in many of the cities, I've seen huge empowerment at that level. If you look at Indore, the whole Swachh story has come out extremely well. Surat. So there are empowered councillors, there are empowered IAS officers who are actually delivering a lot to the citizens. Stay with us. When we talk about citizens, from both of you, I'd also like to understand what is the role that people can play in making sure that we get our urbanization process right.
You're invited to imagine what's next. What the next view you wake up to will be. Where your next adventures will start from. Your perfect space to entertain. And your sanctuary to unwind in. As you begin to imagine your new place, we'll be here to help you find it. Because nothing compares to what's next. Sotheby'srealty.com